Hey everyone, and welcome back. Dr. Shayna Keller here, naturopathic doctor with a fantastic colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Jane Litsey. Today we're going to be talking about the mouth to anus story time. A lot of goodness to talk about with the digestive system. It is how we assimilate, it is how we get nutrition, it's how we get information, it's how we support our microbiome. So we're going to break down some of the basic things that with the way digestion starts, beginning in the mouth, the importance of the stomach, the small intestines, the colon, and a couple little details in between that have to do with the mucosal layer, which will define that for you guys, the mesenteric nervous system, the brain of the digestive system. Everybody calls it the second brain. I'm going to argue that it's actually our first and primary brain that then tells our brain and our skull how to function. And also movement or motility of the GI system and how that kind of works. Because a lot of people are dealing with like slow digestive system right now and are having quote unquote motility issues. So they need motility supporting, what do they call them? Prokinetics. That's the fancy pharmacological term. So I'll let Dr. Jane Litsey introduce herself and we'll get rolling.
I think there might be a slight delay between us, but that's okay.
Got a slight
I'm Dr.
blizzard on
Jane.
our hands.
This is true. Colorado weather. Dr. Jane Litsey. I am a naturopathic physician in Boulder, Colorado. My background is in human physiology, which I feel like serves naturopaths well. A lot of what we do, I think, is basic physiology.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Jane and I know each other from Bastyr University, where we both both attended and graduated in 2020. Okay. So when Jane and I were chatting earlier about the digestive system and like how did we kind of want to like break this down, a lot of Americans are dealing with digestive discomfort, whether that's acid reflux, heartburn, gas and bloating, constipation, diarrhea, food in their stools, just generally not feeling good in their mid area. Like, what is that? So we figured we'd start with kind of like a little story time about the digestive system. Jane, do you want to get us started there?
Yeah, and I think from the very get-go, not limiting it to gut issues. Like I think that's what our current paradigm of medicine um, really isolates. Like this disease is in this body system. In my practice, I treat a lot of skin issues and female reproductive issues that I
Mm-hmm.
think both are very much tied to gut issues. So, first caveat is it's not just symptoms in the gut. I think the symptoms can be global in the human
Mm-hmm.
body, and I think that's what naturopathic doctors do well is kind of connect. It's a whole holistic like model of healing in which we kind of connect all of the parts into one person. Um,
Exactly.
yeah,
And, we're going to get like a little nerdy here just for a quick minute. Humans are not actually, we don't actually have an inside of ourselves. Like we are hollow tubes. Like our mouth and butthole are outside of ourselves. In math, the shape that humans are is called a torus, TOROS, I believe, or US maybe. And that is a
thank you.
donut.
Yeah,
It's a donut shape. We humans are donuts. That's
exactly.
maybe why we love Krispy Kreme so much, huh? So our microbiome is on outside of us, just like our skin is
Exactly.
on outside of us. It's actually made of the same embryological tissue, the tissue that we are made from when we're little tiny cellular structures inside of a uterus. Like we are an embryo, and like in embryology the different tissues divide and become your skin and your heart and your nervous system. Well, our skin and our digestive system are made from the same exact embryological tissue. That's pretty interesting given
Yeah.
what Jane just said about skin stuff, and
Yeah.
that mirrors what I see in my clinical practice too. Patient comes in with acne and painful periods. Great, we're going to be treating the digestive system, and within a few months I expect periods to be less painful, hopefully zero symptoms at all, until like
Hmm.
I'm due for my period. That is literally a normal period. You should not have symptoms that are saying, oh, I'm grumpy and I'm bloated and my clothes are hurting me and I want to murder my husband.
Exactly. Well said. Yeah, I think very broadly when we're eating food, I think most people don't connect that food is information. And I think on a very basic level, if you think of back to like animals and like early humans, the food that we took in like through our digestive tube kind of informed our brain about the world that we were living. within.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Um, so there was a reflection of almost like the abundance of the environment we were contained in reflected the degree of food that was traveling through our digestive tract. Where these days there's such an abundance and like choice with food, and a lot of processed food that I think most people don't see it as almost like primary information
Mm-hmm.
about the environment around us.
Right, right. So what you're saying is how we feed ourselves is providing information to our, well, not only our cells, but also the microbiome. And if we're eating,
Totally.
what was that study that just came out last year? It was like 91, we can consume 91% of our daily and get all of our nutritional value from ultra processed food, and we meet all of our
Right.
nutritional requirements from the government. Check mark.
Right.
But that's only from a very reductionistic perspective, in that you need this much
Correct.
iron, you need this much B vitamins, you need this much calcium, and that's a bare minimum to function. That's just to make sure you don't have scurvy. You need that 88 milligrams from that one potato. But you and I, we're in the business of helping people get well and like become optimally healthy so that they can go and be their like crazy triathlon, marathon runner, biker person up the what Loveland Pass, like because they want to and it's fun. Like that's kind of the people that generally we that see us, is like they're like extreme athletes and they want to
Hmm.
feel better. And then there's all this conflicting information, and you know, food is energy, definitely. And how many of us sit on our phone, myself included, sit on my phone, sit on the TV while I'm eating, while I should be paying attention to how the food is making me feel, and having a little mindfulness around eating my food, eating my meals, as opposed to mindlessly scrolling. And I know, Jane, you're much better about this than me. Is like you got off social media, and I'm a fan that social media is like has a good thing for business, but it also has negative consequences.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good place even to jump off of like digestion actually begins before we put food in our mouths. Like the actual sight of what you're eating and like the smell of what you're eating,
Mm-hmm.
those are all inputs into the nervous system to inform our digestive tract that food is coming. That actually just that act of like smelling, sitting, looking at your food, beginning to really taste your food, it begins kind of the whole arc of digestion
Mm-hmm.
by releasing stomach acid and different, yeah, enzymes throughout the GI tract. That if we're in a state of calm and like presence with eating rather than on the go and distracted, it almost allows the very beginning of kind of opening the whole door for solid to digestion to begin.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I love that you bring up digestion. Yes, we always think about the mouth and the mechanical movement of chewing our food and mixing it with saliva, but actually it's that smell. So we're using our olfactory cranial nerve
Hmm.
to start the digestive process. And how many of us sit there and like microwave our food so we don't really get that smell? We
Exactly.
get our food microwaved in 90 seconds. We're taking ourselves away from that of like heating our food up and smelling, oh, the green chili's ready. Like I'm smelling that aroma, as
Exactly.
opposed to like the microwave just nukes it and it's ready to go, and then it's piping hot and you always burn that spot right behind your big teeth. At least I do. Every time I've had microwave food, it's like always gets me. I need to be careful. Um, so it starts in the
Totally.
nose, and then the digestive system, like the actual physical part of the digestive system that we think about, is the mouth. And I always like to say this, but I will continue to say it: the stomach does not have teeth. So the purpose of food going in your mouth is to chew your food, not three
Yeah, it
times in a giant
begins
bite.
exactly. There's like a very mechanical beginning to digestion of like
Mm-hmm.
actually mastication of like breaking things down. I use it all the time in practice. I literally say I have a colleague and her saying is that the stomach does not have teeth. That if you don't chew your food, your stomach cannot chew it for you.
No,
Um,
no.
yeah, and there's definitely like the beginning, I think, of carbohydrate breakdown occurs in the mouth with some enzymes that are released. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think a lot of folks, just the very simple change of like, are you chewing your food enough?
Yeah.
Can profoundly, like, I think that's what's funny is it can be very simple, but I think
Mm-hmm.
it's a mindfulness thing that if made into like a daily conscious awareness, over time becomes second nature. But I think in the beginning, if you can make that mindful, like slowing down
Yeah.
to actually chew and taste your food, it's the beginning of good digestion.
Well, and this is a great time to talk about smoothies because everybody loves smoothies in the wellness industry, and I got caught up in the smoothie craze too. Smoothies, well, there's a few things that I have some issues with them, but you drink them. You never mix them with your saliva, and most of smoothies contain a lot of carbohydrates, and that is usually found in the form of fruit and vegetables. And again, I'm not against carbohydrates, but if you're not starting digestion of carbs in your mouth where you're supposed to, you're making the rest of the digestive system have to work significantly harder. And so I've got a patient of mine who he was shocked when I told him, I was like, actually, what if you did some warm food in the morning instead of your cold smoothie? Or have like a room temperature smoothie. And he came to me with gas and bloating, and he was just like, no, that can't be. I've been
Yeah.
doing my smoothie for like 5-10 years. Like, I'm good. And he was shocked and pleasantly surprised when he was like, dang, I think you're right that the smoothie was just harsh on my system. And everybody's like, yeah, but smoothies are pre-digested. They are pre-digested. But if we're not digesting them the way we're supposed to and we're just drinking it straight down into the stomach, we're missing a very important part of our digestive capacity, which begins with mixing our saliva. So one of the things is, what is the saying? It goes, drink your solids and chew your liquids. That way you're actually mixing. And obviously if you're drinking coffee, like coffee's not quite the same here, but a lot of people do protein shakes and smoothies. And we're not mixing it with our saliva, so we're missing out on all those really good nutrients you just packed into that beautiful beverage, and you're not getting the nutrients out of it. So pros and cons to go culture.
Totally. I mean, I think I actually do recommend like blended soups often for people that have like compromised digestion
Blended
for
soup,
that
though,
reason.
that's warm.
Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
warm. I think it's probably a function of tasting. Like I think there's an ease with a smoothie just to like gulp it down.
Mm-hmm.
That taste is also like I think of once again we have like all of the nerves that are telling our brain. Like you're looking at your food via eyes, you're smelling your food via nose, then you're tasting like with your
Mm-hmm.
tongue.
Mm-hmm.
That if you're gulping or eating very quickly, it's almost like you're missing out on that communication to the brain of what am I actually eating, which kind of tells then the whole digestive tract of like, hey, we're having this right now. Like, get ready for in a few minutes, you're going to be encountering whatever
Mm-hmm.
substance your tongue has just tasted.
Yep, exactly. Okay, please tell me that you've seen Osmosis Jones.
I've heard of it, maybe through you.
Ah, God. Okay, you've got to watch it. It's like an early 2000s Disney cartoon animation of like a guy who's in the real world, and then like the animation is going on in his body, and the whole thing is Osmosis
Oh, I
Jones is a
love
white
it.
blood cell. And so they talk about
We
like
have
this
talked
guy
about
gets
this.
exposed to something and then the effect in the immune system, and it's pretty accurate from a physiological perspective, and it gives a cute way to understand something that's pretty dang complex. And what reminded me
Totally.
of that is like, oh, you're chewing your food and it's sending a signal saying, hey body, you're going to get this in 5 minutes, and the brain is the control
Exactly.
center, is the kind of the way the movie puts it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to have to get this movie and like make it accessible to people because people need to get my reference. uh,
I
um,
like that.
anyway,
Yeah,
the
I
brain
feel
is the
like a
control center.
cartoon of
Yeah.
totally. Well, and it's really that there's a nerve in the brain called the vagus nerve, and
Mm-hmm.
it is not only in the brain, but it's actually in the back portion of our tongue.
Oh yeah,
That
I
it's
forget about that.
responsible for it basically, leaves the brain, wraps around the throat, wraps around the stomach, wraps around the like small and like it's if you want to call one nerve out for being responsible for all of the communications that take place in the whole GI tract,
Yeah.
it would be the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah,
Absolutely.
it's begins in the brain, but even I think the name, um, it's like known as like the wandering nerve or the wanderer for
Mm-hmm.
how many like places it travels as it goes down our bodies.
Yeah, it's a cool thing. For any of my listeners that follow me on Instagram, they know me talking about horsey lips and then the SCM massage to manually
Mhm.
stimulate and get that vagus nerve activated so it can relax you, especially for people that tend to be a little more like anxious and high strung going into a meal. Doing a little squeeze
Totally.
of your SCM, which is this muscle. Let
Hmm.
me see if I can scooch over this muscle right here. And it's a big muscle, and you can see like I'm getting in there. Like, you don't got to be shy. Like, we, that, and you can even hear the tone in my voice has shifted. And I just did one side for a few moments. So the vagus nerve is very important. And I saw something, I talk a lot about nervous system support for people that have digestive issues. And again, digestive issues we're saying in like a box, but as naturopathic doctors, we think about them as a little more broad, is resting, being still. Okay, well, I want to go do hiking and I want to go do 10 miles on my cross-country skis. Well, can't you find like a ponderosa pine and like hunker down underneath of it and sit for a few moments and actually arrive and become aware of your environment? That is what gives our nervous system a chance to relax, not some $20 million product and some vagus nerve stimulators. Yeah, you can like product your way through something all you want, but really what it comes down to is the non-sexy practice of sitting down on a rock by the river and being quiet and observing. That's really what it comes down to, and that is the best tool for calming your nervous system.
And for digestion, like I think I describe it to patients as like your nervous system kind of has like two branches. Like you're either in a very external world focused space in which you're getting work done, you're like navigating the world, maybe you're slightly stressed, you're like trying to deal with things outside of yourself. That is more the sympathetic, like fight or flight side of our nervous system that's more programmed for like our safety and getting things done, versus the parasympathetic is more of our rest and digest and like assimilate nervous system, where almost like you're shutting the curtains on the outside world so that your body can almost have the resources it needs to do its job of breaking down your food. Like you only have so many resources available. Like if you're getting work done like on a computer and like taking phone calls, it's like your energy is oriented to completing those tasks, that it's taken away from the capacity to break down what you're eating.
Yeah, exactly. So mouth to anus, we eat food and then it comes out as feces, hopefully, unless you're super constipated, and then it comes out as rabbit poops, which is still feces, but maybe not the best poop that I would expect someone to have consistently. So the mouth has digestive enzymes. The stomach has digestive enzymes. Let's talk about the stomach, because the stomach, I think, gets a lot of is very misunderstood. And I know you and I, when we were prepping for this, we were talking about a few different things as it related to the digestive enzymes and digestive capacity of the human stomach. The pH of the human stomach is very, very low, a 1 to 2 pH, which is equivalent to battery acid. And I don't know about you, but I don't want battery acid on my skin, and we need it in our stomach. Here's the problem with conventionally treated heartburn symptoms. You're going to take your Tums, which is calcium carbonate, which drastically increases the pH in your stomach. You're going to take proton pump inhibitors, or PPIs, that directly inhibit the production of stomach acid. That inhibition of stomach acid causes a major downstream effect on our protein digestion, mineral digestion, fat absorption. I mean, you name it. Like SIBO is a very common diagnosis that I see in my practice. And my question is always like, how did we end up here? The pH of the stomach must be low. And one of the treatments, one of the procedures that my clientele often gets is a Bravo test, where they have, the Bravo is what it is. It's like a little capsule, pH capsule, and they don't actually dip it into the stomach. It stays in the esophagus. And the esophagus is supposed to be a neutral pH. So any pH above 7, or below 7, is considered problematic. So we don't want that. I don't want my stomach acid in my throat. My throat is not meant to be digesting protein. My throat is a tube from my mouth to my stomach. Literally, that's all its function is, to move the food down and not choke and die. That's keep it simple. But the problem with the Bravo test is it's not going into the stomach. So what is the other one? The Heidelberg test, which is kind of a pain to administer. There's only one person in the state of Colorado that has this testing, and it's Joshua Goldenberg. He's also a naturopathic doctor in Colorado Springs. I've never seen the machine done, but I've heard good things about it. Baking soda test, don't love. There's these things that are very subjective. There's a time and a place for them. I like concrete, objective data. And the truth is, clinically, what I see, people have high pH. Yeah. pH in the stomach is not what it should be. So
Exactly. They have
what gets
low
digested
low
in the
stomach
stomach?
acid.
Exactly. Not enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we begin the process of like chewing our food in our mouth, that by
Mm-hmm.
the time it lands in our stomach, it's had a chance to slightly be broken down. Um, the stomach also like has kind of a motion to like kind of rotate and like slightly
Mm-hmm.
break down food that way. But I think
Mm-hmm.
the principal act of the stomach, I describe to patients like your stomach is like a fiery cauldron that things should like burn in there.
Pretty much.
Um, yeah, so it's really, very fundamental for breaking things down into smaller parts. Like I think if we were to zoom out, like digestion is kind of the process of taking whole foods and eventually breaking them down into their very like individual parts that
Mm-hmm.
makes it very easy for the small intestine to absorb like those nutrients. So it's kind of an act of like mouth begins that process, stomach then becomes this site of very acidic stomach acid to break
Mm-hmm.
down things further.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also worth mentioning of folks that have dealt with like H. pylori
Yeah.
issues. Like I think it's a common thing that we were talking earlier about like bacteria are largely a reflection of the environment that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think H. pylori prefers a very basic environment or a less acidic
Yeah. Usually
environment.
about a pH of
That
four
is
to five they thrive in.
interesting. Yeah. So I
Mm-hmm.
think I don't necessarily see them as a problem from the very beginning. I see them almost showing up in an environment in which there isn't good stomach acid secretion from the get
Yep.
go.
Yeah, exactly. And the way I think about the digestive system is kind of like a complicated plumbing system, and everything requires the step above it in order for
Hmm.
the step below to go.
Exactly.
And so
Good timing.
when we're chewing our food, we get that message and it goes into the stomach. If we're not producing enough stomach acid because, say, we're taking PPIs long term, and
Mhm.
inhibiting that stomach acid, here's what happens: the lower esophageal sphincter, which is the sphincter that's between the esophagus and the stomach, doesn't close, and so then we get stomach acid, the little bit that we are producing, kind of peaking out, and even again,
Mhm.
pH of 5 is still higher than what's in the esophagus, so it's still irritating. And then we have another sphincter,
Exactly.
the pyloric sphincter, on the other side of the stomach that goes into the small intestine. And this sphincter opens when the stomach has produced enough acid and it's done churning, that churning motion that Jane was talking about, and then it dumps into the small intestine, where we're supposed to have a bile secretion and pancreatic enzyme secretion. And again, if the pH of that chewed up food, which is called chyme, isn't low enough, we're not getting that proper secretion. We might get a weak secretion, but we're not going to get that full, like, I'm going to emulsify all those fats and break down the rest of those carbohydrates with my pancreatic enzymes. It's going to be awesome. Good team effort. We're like, it's kind of like wimpy, shrimpy, like, we don't ever get there. And then I feel gas and bloating immediately after eating.
Exactly.
It's interesting. It's like, it's elegant. It's elegant when we actually take a
It's
step
very
back and look
elegant.
at human physiology.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Very it's kind of like a cascade of like this happens and this happens and this happens. That if in one of those steps something goes awry, the signal isn't there for following steps to do their job. Um,
Exactly.
I think another thing to mention that I know that you are very on top of with the stomach is hiatal hernias.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very common problem that's often overlooked or even minimized. Like I'll
Mm-hmm.
have people come in with their endoscopy results and it says mild hiatal hernia, and it's almost like
No.
nothing's done. Like you can have surgery eventually if you want, but it becomes kind of like a dismissed, this
Yeah.
isn't a problem.
Yeah.
And basically, what it is, that little ring of where the esophagus kind of enters the stomach, there's a
Mm-hmm.
sphincter there. And a hiatal hernia is when part of the stomach can almost come up and get kind of trapped in the
Yeah.
esophagus or in that sphincter.
Yeah.
Common symptoms are that like acid reflux or even like easy fullness upon eating,
Yeah.
even kind of some like pain in that sternum region.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Difficulty
yeah, that
breathing. Yeah,
Totally.
it
Kind of like,
small but mighty is what I call those mild ones.
yeah.
And we used to say this about concussions
Hmm.
too. It's like it's so subjective because every body is a little bit different. Everybody's sensitivities are going to be a little bit different. So to minimize and dismiss, oh, it's only a 2 millimeter like hiatal hernia, can't be that big of a deal. It could be for that person. Like there's so much that goes into it. I did a whole podcast episode on hiatal hernias. So if that's something you
Yes.
have and you're interested in learning more about, search my YouTube channel for the hiatal hernia one, and we talk. There's some practical things you can try right away that don't involve supplementation. I'm not against supplementation, but like really, you doing the work again, just like you
Mhm.
resting under the ponderosa pine, is much better than you paying $10,000 from some stupid machine or some stupid supplement. Again, not that they don't have their place, but
Right.
there's a lot you can do that does not cost an arm and a leg. Um, so hiatal hernias, yeah, very important and so freaking painful. And EGDs don't always diagnose them. Those cameras they stick down your throat, they don't
True.
always diagnose them. Um,
Totally.
okay, so let's talk about the small intestines because actually, hold
Hmm.
on, one more thought about the stomach before we move on. The stomach digests protein. And I alluded to earlier, if you're taking a medication like a proton pump inhibitor, that there's other issues that are going to happen. So you're directly inhibiting stomach acid. And as Jane reminded me, pepsin is the primary enzyme in our stomach that digests protein. So maybe you've seen
Hmm.
that in some supplements and some products for digestive support. Um, so, so we're not getting that beautiful cascade of like we have more stomach acid, increase in stomach acid that causes pepsin to rise, then we can break down more protein, and now we're breaking down our minerals. So we're losing out on a lot of prime digestive capacity that happens right in that fiery cauldron that Dr. Jane mentioned earlier. Very, very important that we have that capacity. In the small intestines, so just past the stomach, is where we get bile and pancreatic enzyme secretions. And Jane, would you kind of walk us through the importance of those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we zoom out once again, very,
Mm-hmm.
very broadly, it's like the whole GI tract has broadly two functions.
Yeah.
It's bringing in nutrients to the body, and it is removing wastes from the body. So it's this like bring in nutrition to feed, take
Mm-hmm.
out waste that's not needed.
Right, right, right.
And I think kind of the epicenter of that is the small intestine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the surface area, it'd be good for us to look that up
Oh
of
my God, it's
it is,
insane.
on a level that you like a tennis court. Like you're like, huh? Like the amount of area of all of these folds of like the mucosa
Mm-hmm.
makes for a huge surface area that if digestion above of like in the stomach, you've broken things down really well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, by the time it reaches the small intestine, the pancreas releases certain enzymes almost to kind of complete the breakdown of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. And
Mm-hmm.
I think of enzymes kind of like scissors. Like you can have, imagine a protein is like little strings of like amino acids. Enzymes are like scissors that go and like snip each of those connections. So now
Mm-hmm.
you have single amino acids that are available for the body to very easily take in. So yeah, the
Okay.
pancreas is responsible for that component of
Mm-hmm.
kind of cutting things up. It's also a location where the liver is one of our main organs of detoxification and elimination, like getting things out of the body.
Mm-hmm.
And the medium that it uses is this substance called bile or bile acids.
Mm-hmm.
And they go in like out of the liver into this little sac that's kind of underneath the liver called the gallbladder. And when you eat food, there is a signal that goes, yeah, from mouth and like whole brain connection to tell that gallbladder like food's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it has two functions. So the gallbladder stores all of that bile that has a lot of the toxins that the body has gotten rid of, kind of like the trash, like send it out via the bile. That then it's squirted into the small intestine. And it acts also as an emulsifier, like to help
Mm-hmm.
break down fat. I think of it like when you're washing a pan that's gotten like really oily from cooking. I think of bile kind of like soap, of it easily allows those like oils to kind of break down, once
Mm-hmm.
again, to make it easier for the body to assimilate that nutrition and take it in. Um, but once again, I think, like you were mentioning, like if there isn't really robust stomach acid, there isn't a great signal to like tell pancreas and to tell the liver gallbladder, like, all right, time to dump your contents.
Exactly.
So there's a slightly reduced capacity to produce those enzymes. And very
Mm-hmm.
common, like you mentioned, like gas and bloating, I think are very common symptoms.
Yeah.
And over time, I think long-standing low stomach acid is kind of the conditions for creating conditions like SIBO.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of think about it like an eddy in a river. It's like you get kind of
Mm,
swept up in it and you're just like stuck in this place until you can get your boat back on track and like pointed down river and get back into the current. It's like we're just kind of
yeah,
stagnant a little bit. So one of the things that I
totally.
learned in school that I didn't really get until I was more into clinical practice was liver stagnation, and that's a Chinese medicine terminology, and that describes this. We're not secreting our bile properly so well in my mind. And there's a number of reasons for that, including low stomach acid, but also like it seems to affect women significantly more than it does our male counterparts of needing a gallbladder removal surgery, having gallbladder attacks. And my suspicion is that has to do with
Mhm.
circulating sex hormones, specifically estrogen. And women obviously have higher estrogen than our male counterparts do. So that could be see, this is where that like female hormone component of things, like, oh, you have painful periods and heavy menstrual cycles and gas and bloating and PMS. Like, see, it's all intimately connected. Like, we can't just send you off to a
Mhm.
gynecologist and a gastroenterologist and a neurologist and a psychiatrist because they don't believe anything you're saying anyway. Like, it's all part of one body, and every person's going to respond slightly differently to that 2 millimeter hiatal hernia. Could be zero effect, and it could be the worst pain that person has ever experienced, right? Um, a word you said that I want to make sure our audience understands is the mucosa. So the way I describe this, and maybe you have a better way to describe it, and that would be helpful for me, is like we have gooey eyes, gooey ear, nose, gooey mouth. Our entire digestive system is like that too. That's kind of like a protection to keep it from drying out. So, one thing
Mhm.
that's really unpleasant about Colorado in the winter is it's dry, negative humidity. You put on a
Very.
humidifier, and that actually reduces our risk of getting colds and flus because our mucosa is moist and it's gooey. So then
It's
it can
moist.
catch all the crap that's not supposed to get into our system. Now, one of the things that I see clinically is a lot of people don't have gooey mucosal membranes, that lining that keeps our digestive tract nice and moist. We're deficient there. And, let me just
Mhm.
say this, all of the drugs, whether you're smoking cigarettes or smoking weed or drinking alcohol or drinking coffee, or I don't know too much about cocaine and heroin and meth, but I would venture to say those are pretty drying substances, pretty astringent, very drying. So all the fun things people like to do are all very drying. So, and then you live in a climate that's super, super hot and dry in the summer and hot and dry in the
Mhm.
winter because you're inside your forced air house. Where are you getting your gooey goodness? Where are you supporting your mucosal membrane? Like, and I know you and I, Jane, we've had this talk a lot. Like, everybody just needs demulcents for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think very foundationally, like that's the function of water.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of whether it's stomach acid or pancreatic enzymes or bile, I think of all of them being mediums of fluids. That if
Yeah.
you're running slightly dehydrated, all of those fluids are slightly thicker. Like they don't
Mm.
flow as well. Um,
Yeah.
like very simplistic kind of physical requirements for
Mm-hmm.
fluids to flow.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I do think of the mucosa as kind of this like mucousy lining that provides kind of a protective layer like throughout the GI tract. Like if you imagine acids being like very, very harsh and like potentially like destroying tissue, I think
Mm-hmm.
as a protective layer, the gut coats itself with this kind of like protective mucus layer that I
Yeah.
often describe as like the element of water. Like if you were to have ulcers and like yeah, very like acidic and like broken down tissue,
Yeah.
being more of like a fire element. I think of mucus and the mucosal lining being almost the protective layer of like water.
Yeah. Right, right, right. And so this kind of brings up a slight tangent, but a lot of these health influencers are saying, oh, you got to get the mucus out of your body. From what we just talked about, mucus is important, but not all mucus, right? Like we've all had a
Totally.
stuffy nose where it just feels so clogged up and we just want to get that congestion out. That's mucus from basically like a war zone. You have your immune system fighting off whatever gunk is going on, and that is the debris. That's the cleanup. That's the mess that needs to
Exactly.
be getting out of the body. So, you have the same thing when you have diarrhea and you have congestion and you take an anti-diarrheal and you take an anti-congestion. Like you're suppressing your body's ability to get that war zone garbage out. Like that's not good. That's not what we need. And then usually you're sick for 3 weeks. Diarrhea, tends to be a little more specific in that like it can get dangerous with electrolyte imbalances and whatnot. So there's always a time and a place.
Totally.
But generally when the body wants to get rid of
Yeah.
something, it's good to let the body get rid of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think of mucus as being one of our first lines of immune defense, in
Definitely.
which we can actually carry like immune cells. They have to have some medium to travel within,
Mm-hmm.
and mucus is often that medium in which they travel.
Mm-hmm.
I often tell patients that they often don't connect that like the GI tract sitting almost just behind the lining of the GI tract is
Mm-hmm.
like 80% of your immune system.
Yeah.
And
A
so
single cell of cells, a single layer of cells. Like
I know.
whoosh, it's so my brain like it doesn't
It's
it
wild.
fritzes out.
Yeah, like and once again, that's to remind like when you put something into your mouth to travel into your body, it's actually not in your body. Like technically that whole tube is the outside world. That the
Mm-hmm.
body has the capacity to either take things in that it says nutrition or
Yeah.
for it to say like toxin or trash, like keep it out. That in
Mm-hmm.
fact like you put it in and the body says that it travels all the way through your body, through the gut, never actually entering the cells of your body. So
Mm-hmm.
pretty wise kind of decision matrix where the body has the capacity to let in or the capacity to reject.
Right. Right, exactly. And now, this brings up another question. Maybe the listeners have heard of something called leaky gut, or intestinal permeability is the scientific term for it. You know, I have some theories about the main culprits of leaky gut, and I do think stress plays a role, like physiological stress. But I really wonder about all the agrochemicals that are in our food, and going back to food as information, and like our
Mm-hmm.
wheat and our soy and our oats are sprayed so
Mm-hmm.
heavily with glyphosate or Roundup, which is a chemical from former Mount Santo, now owned by Bayer as of 2018, the largest one of the largest drug companies in the world, who also funded Nazi Germany, I might add, and I will continue to repeat that until people get that. So now they're in charge of our seeds that are chemically engineered to withstand Roundup, which has to get used more and more every single year, regardless of the amount that the seed is. And it's sprayed on our food. And that's not even the ones that I mentioned earlier about the wheat and the oats that are used as strictly desiccant or drying agents. So we're spraying glyphosate on our food to dry it. So it's equal, which kind of makes sense. We should pick something that's a little less poisonous, associated with class action lawsuits of Hodgkin's lymphoma. For anybody that wants to do a deep dive there or has a friend or family member that's a farmer, they might have capacity to join the class action lawsuit against Bayer. I really do think that the contamination, the toxicity in our food is playing a huge role in production of leaky gut. What do you think, Jane?
100%. Like I think our bodies evolved with the natural world. And I
Mm-hmm.
think over time we have kind of strayed from that like very elemental existence in which you're growing things in alignment with the natural rhythms of
Yeah.
the natural world. That by inducing, I think, a lot of chemicals and fertilizers and herbicides into our food supply,
Mm-hmm.
I think of it from the perspective of the body of there's kind of a like, what is this? Like a confusion that's induced as to
Right.
understanding the information that's passing through our GI tract, or that
Mm-hmm.
it's frankly toxic, like it's
Yeah.
actually injurious, like injures the cells of the
Right.
lining. And like you were saying, like they are literally one cell thick, that as soon as um, that connection is broken,
Exactly.
um, you're allowed then, it almost like you have this boundary, like a very defined boundary that the body is deciding, like you come in, you stay out.
Yeah.
That when that opens, there's a sudden influx of things that can enter the body that
Yep.
otherwise would not have entered the body. And I think this, like, I think that foundational process of opening the door and things entering
Yeah.
is underneath like a number of diseases that I think
Yes.
we don't connect as all stemming from that very root. Even chronic skin conditions. Like I know psoriasis has well studied in the literature, literally finding components of um, like bacterial endotoxins that are in
Yeah.
the skin of psoriasis patients,
Ugh.
meaning that door opening allowed bacterial toxins to come into the body and actually
Mm-hmm.
go through the blood supply and deposit in areas of the skin.
God, that's so
Um,
crazy. It's just like it
yeah, I mean, I
opened
think
the
of it as
door.
exactly. I think of it as headaches. I think of it as mental emotional issues. I think of it
Mm-hmm.
um, even just yeah, entering, allowing things to enter that then induce the immune system, which is kind of
Mm-hmm.
sitting tucked behind that mucosa, to
Yeah.
suddenly be engaged. So your immune system is like, is this an infection? Is this a pathogen? Like it kind of ignites an inflammatory response just to protect the body from this massive influx that it wasn't prepared for.
Yeah, and I feel like autoimmune across the board. You know,
100%.
as you were talking and like thinking about like visualizing the intestinal layer, it reminded me, and I haven't seen any of these type of patients, but like kids now are
Mm-hmm.
so allergic to like everything. And it's not like, you know, Johnny can't have peanuts. It's like Johnny can't be in a room with anybody that has peanuts, or if the person touched peanuts before they came to school, now Johnny's dead. Like it's extreme like that. My question would be,
Mm-hmm.
do these patients that have such severe anaphylactic reactions to allergies, allergens like peanuts is a really common one, do they have such
Mm-hmm.
severe intestinal permeability because mom was exposed
Mm-hmm.
to all of these agrochemicals and like the rise in industrialized food and microwaves and all this fun stuff that seems like it made our life easier, but the health of our life has gone down dramatically. And I believe our generation is the first generation that's actually seen a decrease in life expectancy in the first time in decades in human history, which is disturbing on so many freaking levels. So I wonder, have you seen any of those people that have like super severe allergies, and have you found a way to quantify leaky gut in your practice?
Good question. I mean, I think I honestly assume a lot of the time. I do run a number of stool tests that if um, I look for a number of markers there of if the immune system is like really kicked up in the
Mm-hmm.
gut, and they're missing this microbe called Akkermansia, which actually
Mm-hmm.
lives on like the mucus in the microbiome. If those two are present, I often think about leaky gut.
Okay.
Um, but I think of if you have an autoimmune disease, if you have a skin condition, if you have like a chronic GI issues, chances are there's a high likelihood that that's a component.
Yeah.
Even if there's poor digestion, I think upstream, like not
Mm.
fully breaking down foods,
Yeah.
you're getting almost like whole proteins that are entering the small intestine that by that point it should be pretty snipped up.
Yeah.
um, that I think people that have not digested food well can, over time, that can lead, I think, to intestinal permeability or what we
Yeah.
call leaky gut. I
Right.
think also eating foods that inherently our bodies don't break down well. Like I think there's a
Mm.
whole, processed food realm that I think is responsible for a huge part of the
Right.
foods that we eat that our body says no to. But I think even within the whole foods realm, like some folks don't digest, dairy well or don't digest eggs well. That
Right.
over time, I think if you're chronically eating those, eventually I think the body can, those like little membranes can break down and open up, causing leaky
Yeah.
gut.
Yeah, that irritation. Okay, so the small
Yeah.
intestine, that's where we do primarily absorption of our nutrients. Hopefully, in that, the upstream digestion capacity has chopped everything up into small micro bits that we can actually absorb into our cells. Now, what's really crazy when I found this out, not only are we eating for feeding ourselves and providing the building blocks to support a healthy human body, but we're also feeding our microbiome, the bugs, the microbes, the Akkermansia genus that you mentioned earlier. What are some of the other like Bacteroides?
I think
Like,
Fecali, yeah, Prunitzii is kind of like a
yeah.
keystone species. Like I think of it like an ecosystem. Like it's
Yeah.
literally like imagine the Amazon rainforest in which you have all of these animals, different, levels of organization that
Mm-hmm.
are kind of dependent upon one another to have this ecosystem function. That if you begin to lose key species in that ecosystem, the whole population can have like
Right.
issues.
Right.
They're
Like
dependent
beavers.
upon each other. Yeah.
Yeah, keystone species. Yeah, exactly. Beavers are keystone species in rivers,
Mhm.
and when beavers go away, we see a huge decline in every type of species,
It's a
plants, animals,
cascade.
insects. Yeah, cascade effect exactly.
Exactly.
So we're eating to feed our microbiome, and we produce minerals and vitamins and nutrients. Like
Mhm.
one of the nutrients that I've used and I've taken personally when I was dealing with some of my gut health issues was butyrate. Butyrate is a short
Mhm.
chain fatty acid that feeds our colonocytes or colonocytes, and it's a preferential food for them, so it helps them to heal and restore. And we need our microbiome to be able to break
Yeah,
down soluble fiber and turn that into butyrate. Really
totally.
fantastic. And like, again, you can take all the supplements you want, but hopefully you're starting to understand like the system is complex and nuanced, and there's a lot of components to think about, and which string are we going to pull on first? And I usually think north to south. Like, okay, we talk about the mouth, we get you chewing, we get your stomach acid right, we see how that goes, and then we move downstream to see if we need additional support. What else is the small intestines really important for? Did I miss anything?
Yeah, I mean, you have this thing called the migrating motor complex, which gets brought up a lot in SIBO. I
Mm-hmm.
think of it like there's like a broom that someone goes, I think it turns on if you're fasting for like 2 hours. It gives almost that area of the body time to clean house. So it's
Mm.
like this part of the nervous system is activated and leads to kind of this almost like sweeping response that helps if there's any bacteria that have found their way to the small intestine. The majority of our microbiome of like bacteria, fungi, viruses is in the end of the colon called the large intestine. That actually the small intestine is typically not well inoculated with bacteria. So that migrating motor complex can serve as a way to sweep out any bacteria that are up there, can sweep
Mm-hmm.
out any like food products that like didn't go into the body that are kind of hanging out there. So I think of it as a way to kind of clean house,
Yeah.
which I think is dependent on having breaks between meals. Like you're not someone that's like always snacking all day,
Mm-hmm.
that actually has concrete like meal times.
Right.
Um, to
Right.
give
So
the gut some rest for it
yeah.
to clean house.
So God, there's just so many conflicting information. And again, always speak with your doctor on whether any of these recommendations you hear from some random people on the internet are good for you or not. But it's important that we are taking breaks in between meals. Like this, eat like 6 small meals or 8 small meals, or eat every 2 hours and have a small handful of something. I really think that is more of a well, let's think about evolutionarily how our ancestors would have done it. None of them would have ever had like a very large meal. Well, unless they got like a moose they killed. They finally got the team together, killed a moose. They had a big old feast for their moose kill. But they're usually eating like berries and this, like, oh, we found a little thing over here. Like we're going to eat right now. So it was kind of like a adaptability component. Like we ate the dandelion roots that were growing and we ate the berries we found and then we got the moose. We weren't doing a whole lot of agricultural things, but there has been a lot of benefit to our domestication and our rooting down is what I'm trying to say. The benefit is
Mm-hmm.
that now we've expanded technology and, different types of, I don't even know if it's that worth it because sometimes I want to run away to a 40 acre homestead and like leave me alone. So I don't know if it's fully worth it, but we've done some very cool things. Like the developments and technology and scientific achievements, like we've been able to do more by not moving around. So then, this question comes up of, should we be snacking or should we be having, 3 meals a day, which I'm an advocate of the 3 meals a day type of a thing. And if you're going to skip a meal, I think it's more beneficial to skip dinner, just from a digestive capacity view. Digestive capacities generally are strongest in the morning and strongest at noon. Strongest at noon first, and breakfast is second. And breakfast is like in the morning, not at like 11 a.m., which is the
correct. Yeah, I think it takes a lot of energy to digest food. That I think, having times that are like you are letting go of what you're doing to almost put energy towards that process. And then stopping eating so that your body can spend energy like assimilating that food, processing that food, cleaning house in the GI tract. Like I think we're designed for periods of on and periods of off. That if we're always in a state of like activity, it doesn't provide almost the room for the body to do its functions in the absence of food. Right. I think it also being connected to like when you're sick, with like a fever, like not a good time to be like, I should be eating some food. Like I think the body is trying to allocate resources towards the immune system. That digestion, once again, takes a lot of energy. That if you're eating while also your body is trying to mount an immune response, you're kind of dividing your resources between two locations.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and I always like to tell my patients the body can only do one thing at a time. So we're going to focus on your gut health. We're going to focus on that. We're going to focus on your thyroid. We're going to do that. And like, I'm being reductionist in my terminology, but hopefully you guys are catching me. All right. So let's talk about what the colon does.
Yeah. So at this point, most of the nutrition the lion's share has been absorbed in the small intestine. The large intestine, we do get like reabsorption of water and certain minerals, I think, that takes place. It's also where your microbiome is located, like the majority of your bacteria, fungi, viruses, yeast. And so, they definitely serve to, I think, give us some nutrition, almost like they can break down some things that weren't fully broken down by the stomach, by pancreatic enzymes. Bacteria, I think, are kind of like the last stop for even things like, I think, certain B vitamins that they can take are nutrients and give us B vitamins, or vitamin K, I think, is another one that they're providing us. Back to your mentioning of short chain fatty acids, of the relationship that I often describe of, we give bacteria food in the form of fiber, and fiber comes from plants, basically things that aren't necessarily used by us, like they're not nutritional building blocks that we take in to build something, but they make it then to the large intestine, and they serve as food products for the microbiome. So it's like you're feeding them by feeding them plants. In return, they can turn those dietary fibers and make those things called short chain fatty acids. And they also, the like butyrate you mentioned, another function, they actually can tighten the tight junctions between cells. So we were talking about leaky gut being this like opening of the door. If you have a really robust microbiome and you're feeding it well with fibers, and it's making that thing called short chain fatty acids, those actually help tighten that boundary. So it's kind of like you're increasing the integrity of your GI tract if you have a robust microbiome and you're feeding it well. It's also, I think, where a lot of the kind of training of the immune system takes place. Of, if the colon is the outside world, man, I'm getting some sun feedback here. If the colon is the outside world and we're having bacteria that are hanging out there, it's kind of this boundary of like, bacteria are outside and our body is inside, and our immune system then sits on that interior.
Yeah.
Um, that I think
Just
a
on the
lot of,
inside.
yeah, a lot of the like the immune system learning almost like what is friend and what is foe, like a lot of that training where
Yeah.
you were describing like a hypersensitive immune system where like everything is like reacted to.
Mm-hmm.
um I think a lot of that begins with disturbed microbiome,
Yep. And
in which the
I
immune
don't know
system
about you,
gets kicked up.
but dude, the amount of antibiotics that I took as a kid, 5, 6, 7, 8 times a year, I'm not even joking. And how many kids grew up this way? A lot. A lot
Totally.
of kiddos do. So antibiotics are great. I love antibiotics. They save our lives. And they also destroy our microbiome. So we're seeing an epidemic of people that cannot eat fiber. Fiber aggravates them. That's the whole premise is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It's where the organisms that are supposed to be in your colon move into your small intestines where we're supposed to be absorbing, not having
Exactly.
colonization, at least the way we understand it currently. And, science is always changing. We can be 100% sure or 99.9% sure today, and tomorrow we find something new that blows up this whole thought, and maybe we're actually not that sterile. I have a feeling. Anyway,
I know. I agree.
so we only got a few more minutes here. Gosh, we've been talking for almost an hour now, which is kind of crazy. Um, the microbiome predominantly lives in our colon, and we nuke ourselves with antibiotics every sniffle and every sneeze and every cough that we get. And I'm grateful for antibiotics. It's one of the class of drugs that has made modern medicine fantastic. People aren't dying from things that they would have died before. I have a family member would be dead without antibiotics. Very, very grateful for them. However, we need to be judicious in our use of them because we are going to end up in a place, well, chronic illness, sure, but also in a place where we're going to end up with antibiotic resistance. And check out my other podcast episode with Brianna Wiles, who's an herbalist, and her and I talk about this and some alternatives that are great options. And always seek out an herbalist or someone who's trained in herbs like Jane and I are, so that you can get a good herbal formula for the type of infection that you're dealing with. Any final thoughts on digestion before we kind of finish up here today?
I think since you're out kind of in farm country and a lot of agricultural areas, I
Yeah.
think it would be worthwhile. Like right before I went to naturopathic medical school, I had a time where I was really interested in soil science.
Mm-hmm.
And I attended this soil science lecture, and it was like a week long workshop. Um, and there was this really holistic soil scientist that had kind of pioneered a lot of this research on
Mm-hmm.
called the soil food web. And what was so interesting, like listening to that conversation with the background in human physiology, was her describing almost this relationship that took place with the root systems of plants and how they were in this symbiotic relationship at the root system with bacteria and fungi and viruses. And that
Mm-hmm.
there was this exchange that took place in which, if you can imagine, a plant above ground has access to the sun and is taking that energy and making carbohydrate.
Yeah.
And it sends that carbohydrate that it produces from the sun down to its root system to
Mm-hmm.
feed the microbiome at its roots. And in
Yeah.
exchange, the bacteria, the fungi, the viruses, they're in the soil, which has all of these rocks and minerals that they can break down and like mineralize into almost absorbable nutrition for the plant. So there's this
Mm-hmm.
beautiful exchange that takes place where the plant is providing carbohydrate, which fiber, and the
Yep.
microbiome is providing protection, like immune protection, along with various minerals for the plant to
Mm-hmm.
absorb.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat there in such awe, thinking how similar that relationship is between us, between our, gut microbiome and our digestive tract, almost being the root system of our body,
Yeah.
um, and the relationship I think we have in the world today with like big food, spraying spraying plants to kill almost pathogenic bacteria is very, very similar to our use, I think, of antibiotics.
Right.
Um,
Right.
that
And
there's,
eat my
yeah,
ultra processed sterile food that I tell you exactly what's in it and there's not much else. Yeah, this the symbiosis, the working together in
mhm,
unison. We work with our microbiome and they live inside of us and it's a win-win. And we need to forget that
exactly.
we are a pale blue dot, just like Carl Sagan said about the earth. We too are our own small world that feeds billions, trillions, I forget what the number is. So gosh, we can just keep going on, and I do intend on having
I know.
farmers and some soil scientists on here as well because farming is critical to our health and getting better. But we're gonna wrap up. So we talked about the mouth to anus. We didn't quite get all the way to the anus, but we got to the colon. And we talked about the importance of digestion and assimilation and excretion, which is getting rid of the garbage in your body, and how it's a complex cascade. It's not just one thing, and then that's it. That's all we have to treat. It's like it's a downward cascade event. So my next podcast guest is going to be a midwife here local to Montrose, and we're going to chat about that stuff.
Cool.
And Jane, where can we find you if any of the listeners want to get in touch or reach out?
Yeah, I'm practicing at a clinic called Boulder Natural Health up in Boulder, Colorado. You could probably go to their website, yeah, bouldernaturalhealth.com, and find me there.
Okay, excellent. And if you guys have enjoyed this content, really please like and subscribe. I'm trying to get to 100 subscriptions subscribers so that I can get a customized URL link. I really appreciate your guys' support so I can keep putting out this fantastic content and have more and more guests on. I will see you next time. Thank you so much.